"You don't belong in first class." The words weren't whispered. They were hurled like a verdict across the narrow aisle. The flight attendant's finger cut through the air, sharp as a blade, inches from the face of a black woman seated calmly in 2 amperes. The cabin, once filled with the soft hum of pre-boarding chatter, froze in an instant. Eyes lifted, breath stalled. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She simply held her phone to her ear, her red blazer a quiet defiance against the sterile blues and grays of the aircraft. To the passengers around her, she might have looked like any traveler alone, dressed with restraint, no flash, no entourage. But the weight behind her stillness carried a gravity the crew hadn't yet recognized. "Stand up!" the attendant barked again, her voice grinding against the recycled air. Behind her, a tall man in a pressed button, down leaned forward, smirking. "Yeah, give the seat to someone who actually paid for it." His words dripped casual cruelty, as if dignity could be reassigned like luggage. The woman in red finally lowered the phone, her gaze steady, unreadable. No protest, no raised voice, just silence. And that silence cut deeper than any shout. From 3 rows back, a younger passenger shifted uncomfortably. She gripped her own boarding pass, her lips parting in a whisper. "Why does this feel wrong?" Another man muttered. "Because it island." A phone camera flicked on, its tiny red light casting a discreet glow in the dim cabin. The attendant planted her hand on the headrest, leaning closer, her authority swelling. "You heard me. This seat isn't for you." The words slammed harder than turbulence. Around them, luxury champagne glasses and glossy magazines suddenly felt like props in a play, one where power was scripted and prejudice was the stage direction. The woman in red exhaled slowly, almost like she'd rehearsed this moment. And maybe she had not this exact flight, not this exact aisle, but this exact humiliation, countless times before. The memories were etched in her bones, resurfacing with every pointed finger, every doubting glance. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The woman didn't rise, didn't yield. Instead, she leaned back against the leather seat as if anchoring herself to the truth. She belonged here more than anyone else on that plane. The storm was gathering, and she was ready to let it break around her. Her name was Naomi Carter, 42 years old, founder of Carter Global Holdings, a company valued in the billions. But in this cabin, on this flight, she wore no crown, just a red blazer, pressed slacks, and the kind of calm posture that dared anyone to underestimate her. And they did. Naomi had boarded alone, carrying nothing more than a slim black leather case. No designer luggage, no diamond watch, no flashing signals of wealth. To the crew, she looked ordinary. To the man across the aisle, scrolling on his phone, she was invisible. That was intentional. This trip wasn't for show, it was for inspection. Horizon Air, the airline she had quietly acquired a controlling stake in the previous quarter, had been under scrutiny. Customer complaints about bias, selective treatment, and policy being used as a weapon. Naomi wanted to see it with her own eyes, not through sanitized reports. So she dressed down, no entourage, no announcement, just another passenger in seat 2 amperes. The irony? She had chosen first class not for comfort, but for clarity. It was here, in these polished leather seats, that power dynamics revealed themselves most brutally. Who got a smile? Who got suspicion? Who was welcomed aboard and who was told, "You don't belong"? And today, the script was already writing itself. The attendant hovering over her had a name badge that read Nicole H. Sharp uniform, hair pinned so tight it looked painful, voice sharpened by years of unchecked authority. To Nicole, Naomi was just another problem to be corrected, a seat to be reassigned, a nuisance to be removed. Naomi didn't meet her glare. She had learned long ago that silence unnerved people more than argument. At 25, she had walked into a bank to secure her first commercial loan and been told, "You don't look like someone who handles that kind of money." She left that meeting without the loan but with the fire that built her first company. At 32, she'd been denied a boardroom chair in a hotel she owned, mistaken for support staff. That sting never left her. And now, a decade later, the same narrative had found her at 30,000 feet. Nicole's words weren't just orders. They were echoes. Echoes Naomi had heard all her life. But this time, the ending would be different. Around her, the cabin began to shift. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "She showed her ticket." A man in business casual shook his head. Doesn't matter. They'll push her anyway. The murmurs were growing, the divide between silence and action stretching thin. Naomi inhaled once, slow and deliberate. She placed her phone face down on the tray table, her voice soft but steady. I'll wait. That single line wasn't compliance, it was control. A promise that she wasn't going anywhere. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Nicole's expression. The storm had only just begun. Nicole didn't step back. If anything, she doubled down, her posture stiff as if the seat itself was a battleground. I said move, she repeated, her words slicing sharper this time. From the opposite aisle, another attendant, Brian, mid-30s, jaw cocked with the kind of smug confidence that comes from never being challenged, sauntered over. What's the issue here? He asked, though his smirk said he'd already decided. Nicole tilted her chin toward Naomi. Fraudulent ticket. Doesn't belong here. Brian glanced at Naomi once, eyes sweeping from her simple blazer to the leather case at her feet. His smirk widened. Yeah, doesn't look like first class to me. He didn't even ask for ID. His judgment was the verdict. 2 rows back, a white-haired man coughed into his fist, muttering just loud enough. Saw this last year in Dallas. Same thing. His seatmate, a young Latina traveler, pulled her phone out, thumb hovering over the record button, hesitation trembling in her fingers. Naomi remained still. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a mirror, forcing everyone else's noise to echo louder. But the louder they grew, the more the cabin shifted. Nicole reached for the boarding pass tucked near the seat pocket. She snatched it up with practiced aggression and waved it in the air. This? Fake. Printed. You can tell by the paper. She snapped it against her palm like evidence in a courtroom. That's not your call, Naomi replied at last, her tone calm, flat, almost surgical. Scan it again. But Nicole didn't move toward the scanner. She tore the pass in half, pieces fluttering onto Naomi's tray table like shredded dignity. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Did she just?" Brian leaned closer, adding fuel. Seats been reassigned. Got VIPs waiting. He nodded toward the aisle where a couple in tailored suits hovered, champagne flutes in hand, watching the spectacle unfold with quiet entitlement. Naomi's gaze flicked briefly toward them, then back to Brian. Paid in full. Booked under my name. Brian shrugged, feigning pity. Then you'll get a refund. Economy has space. The young Latina couldn't hold back anymore. She hit record, her voice shaking as she whispered into the camera. They just tore her ticket. She showed proof. Nicole noticed the phone, her eyes narrowing. No filming. She snapped her fingers toward the passenger. Put it away, or I'll call security. The tension thickened, pressing down on the leather seats, the air vents, the silence of the watching crowd. A businessman in row 4 adjusted his tie, muttering, "She hasn't raised her voice once, and they're treating her like a criminal." Naomi didn't flinch. She folded the torn boarding pass pieces neatly, set them on the tray table, and said quietly, "You're making this worse for yourselves." But Nicole only sneered. "You don't get to threaten crew." She looked to Brian. "Escalate it." Ugh. And just like that, Brian tapped his earpiece, summoning authority from the cockpit. The words carried through the cabin like a warning bell. "Captain, we need you in first class." Every passenger knew what that meant. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was about to become a spectacle. Naomi clasped her hands in her lap, steady as stone. Around her, the storm gathered momentum. The escalation had begun. The torn boarding pass still lay on Naomi's tray table, folded like an insult she refused to discard. Around her, the murmurs swelled, phones raised, heads shaking, disbelief rippling through first class like turbulence. But Naomi didn't rise to meet it. She didn't flinch, didn't lash out, didn't give Nicole or Brian the satisfaction of chaos. She simply breathed. One measured inhale, one steady exhale, the kind of stillness that made people lean in, waiting for noise that never came. Nicole mistook the silence for weakness. "Security will have you out in minutes," she snapped, her voice echoing off the curved walls of the cabin. She turned to the couple still standing with champagne in hand. "Apologies for the delay. We'll seat you shortly." The woman smiled politely, though her eyes darted uneasily toward Naomi. The man smirked, as if reassignment were nothing more than a clerical error. Brian crossed his arms, looming at Naomi's side. "Best not to make this harder than it has to be," he said, rehearsed and dismissive. "Step out now, avoid the scene." Naomi's gaze lifted to him, calm, but piercing, a quiet reminder that not every war is fought with volume. Her lips parted just enough for 3 words, low and controlled. "I am seated." The phrase landed heavier than a shout. A few passengers straightened, as if they too felt the weight of it. In row 3, a middle-aged man lowered his newspaper, brow furrowed. "She hasn't done anything wrong," he muttered. A younger passenger beside him whispered, "But they're not listening." Nicole waved him off, barking, "This is not your concern." She glanced back toward the galley, signaling for reinforcements. Her tone hardened, almost triumphant. "Captain's on his way. Then you'll learn what compliance means." Still, Naomi didn't react. Her hands rested lightly on the folded paper, her posture unshaken. Every second of restraint shifted the air, turning her composure into an indictment. Because in a space where bias thrived on escalation, Naomi gave them none, passengers noticed. The Latina woman still filming whispered into her camera, "She's not even fighting, and they're treating her like she's dangerous." Naomi heard, but she didn't turn. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, memory flickering like lightning. Atlanta, 24 years old, denied boarding on a flight despite a confirmed ticket. "Not the image we want in first class," the agent had said. She had swallowed that humiliation in silence back then, but silence had become her armor, her weapon, and now her choice. Her eyes opened again, sharper. She placed the torn ticket pieces into her case, as if preserving evidence for a trial already underway. Then she leaned back into her seat, grounding herself. No raised voice, "No desperate play," just presence. And it was that presence, not volume, that unsettled Nicole most. For the first time, the attendant's jaw twitched, her authority beginning to fray. The silence was no longer empty. It was a storm contained, and everyone in the cabin could feel it pressing against the walls. The hum of the cabin shifted. What had begun as whispers now took shape as voices, hesitant at first, then firmer, like cracks forming in glass. 2 rows back, the Latina passenger phone trembling in her hand tilted her camera toward Naomi. "They tore her ticket. She's sitting where she belongs," she whispered, her voice carried by courage more than volume. The red recording light blinked like a beacon in the dim cabin. Beside her, a middle-aged man in a navy blazer leaned forward. "This isn't right," he said louder this time, as though testing the air. "She hasn't broken a single rule." Nicole snapped her head around, eyes sharp. "Sir, stay seated. This is airline procedure." Her words cracked like ice, brittle but commanding. But not everyone obeyed. In row 4, a young black college student pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering, conflicted. "Should I be filming this?" he asked quietly. Across the aisle, an older woman shook her head. "Yes, people need to see." Her voice was steady, almost maternal, cutting through the tension with conviction. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze meeting the students. For the first time since the boarding pass was torn, she spoke directly to someone other than crew. Her tone was calm, deliberate. "Use your words, not your lens." The student froze, his phone lowered slowly, his chest rising with a sudden breath. "Then I'll say it," he muttered, louder now. "This is discrimination." Gasps rippled across the cabin. Some passengers averted their eyes, others nodded in quiet agreement. The spell of silence was breaking. Brian stepped forward, irritation etched into his posture. "Everyone calm down. We follow protocol. She's non-compliant. End of story." "Non-compliant?" The man in the blazer shot back. "She's sitting in her assigned seat." His voice carried the clipped tone of someone used to boardrooms, not aisles. Nicole's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you continue to interfere, I'll have security escort you out as well." The threat hung heavy, but the cabin no longer belonged solely to her. In row 6, a young woman leaned across the aisle to her seatmate. "I saw her scan green at the gate. She belongs here." Her words were oxygen. Passengers straightened, emboldened. The murmurs grew into declarations, fragments of defiance weaving together into something stronger. Through it all, Naomi sat still, eyes calm, posture unbroken. She hadn't asked for their defense, but now it was gathering around her, organic, undeniable. The narrative was shifting not because she shouted, but because others finally spoke. And in that moment, the cabin transformed from an audience to witnesses. Nicole felt it too. Her command of the room was slipping, her authority diluted by every voice that refused to stay silent. She glanced at Brian, eyes flickering with unease. Naomi, steady as stone, folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to raise her voice. The crowd was raising it for her. The balance of power was beginning to tilt. The aisle parted like a stage curtain when the cockpit door swung open. Out stepped Captain Daniel Pierce, tall, shoulders squared, the authority of the uniform draped over him like armor. His gaze swept the cabin once, landing on Naomi with practiced detachment. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, though his tone carried less curiosity than conclusion. Nicole seized the moment. Passenger and 2 amperes with fraudulent documentation, refusing to vacate. Daniel's jaw flexed. He didn't ask for details, didn't request verification. He looked at Naomi, then at the couple still clutching champagne glasses behind Nicole. "Ma'am," he said, voice even but cold, "this seat's been reassigned. You'll need to move to economy or disembark." The words fell heavy, not as instructions but as a verdict already rendered. A murmur spread. The man in the navy blazer shook his head. "She hasn't broken a single rule," he barked. The college student echoed. "She scanned green at the gate." Daniel raised a hand, silencing them with the authority of his rank. "Passengers interfering will be noted. FAA regulations don't allow disruptions." Brian smirked, folding his arms as though justice had just been served. Nicole exhaled sharply, relief flashing across her face. They thought the weight of the captain's voice had sealed Naomi's fate, but Naomi didn't rise. She didn't argue. She let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to feel its gravity. Then, calmly, "You just called me fraudulent without evidence. Is that your final statement?" Daniel's eyes narrowed, his posture hardening. "I don't need to justify protocol to you." The Latina passenger gasped, her phone still recording. "He didn't even check," she whispered. The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his disdain. "Listen carefully. You're holding up an entire flight. People with real status are waiting. Either you comply or you're off this aircraft." The word "real" landed like a slap. Passengers shifted, their discomfort audible in sighs and mutters. A woman in row 6 whispered to her seatmate, "Did he just say that?" Naomi placed her palms on the armrests, steady, grounded. Her voice cut through the cabin, quiet but edged with steel. "You mean people who look like them?" She gestured subtly toward the couple waiting. The silence after was louder than any shout. Nicole bristled, defensive. "Don't twist this. This is about procedure." The blazer man stood halfway up from his seat. "Procedure doesn't involve tearing a valid ticket in half," his voice carried, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement. Daniel's eyes flicked around, realizing control was slipping. His tone sharpened, commanding, "This discussion is over. Security is being called." Gasps rippled. Phones lifted higher. The cabin was no longer neutral. It was charged, alive with tension, every witness leaning into the spectacle. Naomi didn't flinch. Her reply was measured, almost chilling in its calm. "You've just escalated bias into a recorded incident. Choose your next words carefully." For the first time, the captain's authority wavered. His lips tightened, but no words came. Nicole and Brian exchanged uneasy glances. The storm was no longer distant. It was here, contained within 2 amperes, and Naomi was its center. The cabin doors had not yet closed, but the air already felt suffocating. Authority pressed down like a storm cloud, heavy and deliberate. Nicole moved first. She reached across Naomi's tray table, snatched the torn remnants of the boarding pass, and let them flutter to the floor like confetti of contempt. "Trash!" she hissed. That's all it ever was. Gasps burst across the rows. The Latina passenger whispered into her phone, "She just destroyed her ticket completely." Her recording light blinked brighter in the darkened cabin, a red witness no one could silence. Brian, emboldened by the captain's presence, stepped closer. His shadow loomed over Naomi as he muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "You're a scam. People like you always try to sneak in where you don't belong." The phrase, "people like you," crackled through the cabin like a live wire. Heads turned, whispers sharpened. One man muttered, "He actually said that." Another shook his head, disgusted. Naomi stayed rooted, her spine tall, her hands still folded. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "You've crossed the line." But Daniel, the captain, ignored her calm. He reached for the cabin phone and spoke into it with clipped authority. "Security to gate B14. Immediate removal required. Passenger in 2 amperes, non-compliant, fraudulent. Empt." The words echoed through the cabin like a public indictment. Passengers stiffened, the reality of police involvement making their stomachs knot. Some clutched their bags tighter, Others raised their phones higher. The middle-aged man in the blazer stood fully now. "Captain, this is harassment." She showed her documentation. "You never even checked." Daniel glared. "Sit down, sir, or you'll be escorted out too." The student's voice cracked but carried, "She belongs here. I saw the scan." His words trembled, but his conviction didn't. Nicole turned, snapping, "Quiet, all of you!" Her voice cracked, desperation leaking into authority. She pointed at Naomi again, her finger almost trembling. "You don't belong in this seat. You don't belong on this flight." That was the breaking point. The older woman across the aisle rose halfway, clutching her pearl necklace as though it could steady her outrage. "I've flown for 40 years, she said firmly. "I've never seen a passenger treated this way." But the crew ignored her. Brian bent down suddenly, hand shooting toward Naomi's case on the floor. He pulled it up, holding it high as if it were contraband. "What's in here? Fake documents? Stolen cards?" His tone was triumphant, vicious. Naomi's eyes narrowed, voice low but cutting. "That's theft, and you'll answer for it." Brian smirked, dropping the case onto the aisle floor with a thud. The contents rattled inside, but Naomi didn't reach for it. She simply looked at him, gaze steady, a warning sharper than any raised fist. Passengers' voices swelled, outrage now uncontained. "Give it back!" someone shouted. "This is wrong!" another called. Phones dotted the aisle like lanterns, recording every second. The cabin was no longer a plane preparing for takeoff. It was a courtroom, and every witness was the jury. Naomi remained still, but her silence thundered. The line had been crossed, and the reckoning was inevitable. The torn ticket on the floor, the leather case tossed like evidence. The cabin's oxygen thinned under the weight of humiliation. Nicole's chest rose with a shallow triumph. Brian folded his arms, smirk intact. The captain gripped the handset, waiting for security to arrive. And still, Naomi hadn't moved. She inhaled once, slow and steady, her gaze sweeping across the cabin, not at Nicole, not at Brian, not even at Daniel, but at the passengers who now bore witness. Then, with deliberate calm, she reached for her phone, lifted it from the tray table, and tapped a single contact. "Rachel," she said evenly, her voice carrying in the silence. On the other end, a crisp female voice responded instantly. "Yes, Miss Carter?" The shift was immediate. The name alone, Carter, sparked murmurs. A man whispered, "Wait, Carter, as in Carter Holdings?" The Latina passenger lowered her phone briefly, her eyes widening. Naomi's words were measured, surgical. "Activate protocol. Document everything from this moment. Audio, video, timestamps. Secure the log." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Understood. Internal systems are live. Do you want escalation to the board?" Nicole barked. "Who are you calling? Put that phone away right now." But her voice cracked, the edge of control slipping. Naomi's eyes never left hers. "Proceed to escalation," she said into the phone. "Flag every phrase they've used. Fraudulent. Doesn't belong. Real status." Her tone sharpened, each word a blade, and marked the moment they destroyed boarding documentation. Passengers gasped. A student in row 5 muttered, "She's logging all of it." The captain stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Ma'am, give me that phone." "You can't." Naomi turned her head slowly, her stare locking onto him with unblinking precision. Her reply cut through the aisle. "Touch me, and this becomes federal." The silence that followed was electric. Daniel's hand froze midair, his jaw clenching, but he pulled back. Rachel's voice came again, firm and unwavering. "Log secured. Legal team notified. Compliance board on standby." Nicole laughed nervously, trying to salvage ground. "Oh, please. Empty threats. You're no one. Just another fraud making noise." Naomi placed the phone on speaker, the clear voice of Rachel filling the cabin. "For the record, Miss Carter, you are confirmed as majority shareholder of Horizon Air. This flight is currently operating under your ownership." The cabin erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief rolling like a wave. The man in the blazer whispered, "Majority shareholder?" The older woman clutched her pearls tighter, her eyes darting between Naomi and the captain. Brian stammered, She's bluffing." But Naomi didn't need to raise her voice. She leaned back in her seat, her hands folding gracefully in her lap. "No," she said, calm and absolute. "You've mistaken silence for submission. That's your last mistake." The witnesses had heard. The record had begun. The counterstrike was underway. The cabin was no longer quiet. Phones hovered like lanterns, passengers leaning into the spectacle with wide eyes and shallow breaths. Nicole froze mid-step, her mouth half open as Rachel's words still echoed from Naomi's phone. Majority shareholder of Horizon Air. For the first time, Brian's smug expression faltered. That can't be real, he muttered, though his voice carried no conviction. Naomi didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it stretch, let the weight of truth settle on every corner of the cabin until even the hum of the air vents seemed to stop. Then, slowly, she rose from her seat. Not hurried, not defensive, measured like a judge walking into her own courtroom. She adjusted her blazer, her presence filling the narrow aisle with something heavier than authority, inevitability. Her voice was calm, but every syllable landed with precision. My name is Naomi Carter. I am the founder of Carter Global Holdings, and 3 months ago, I became the majority shareholder of this airline. The words detonated. Gasps erupted, passengers exchanging looks of shock and disbelief. A man near the galley whispered, "She owns the airline?" The Latina passenger's phone shook as she whispered into the mic, "It's true. She's the boss." Nicole's jaw tightened, her attempt at authority unraveling. This doesn't change protocol," she stammered. "No one person can—" Naomi cut her off with a glance so sharp it silenced the aisle. "You tore the boarding pass of your employer. You accused me of fraud in front of witnesses. You called me less than real in a cabin I paid for, in an airline I own. And you did it with arrogance that will cost you everything." The captain's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, authority no longer shielded him. It exposed him. Brian tried to recover, his voice trembling. "Anyone can say they're an owner?" Rachel's voice rang from the phone, crisp and undeniable. "Verification complete. This flight is operating under Miss Carter's ownership authority. All command decisions are subject to her discretion. The board is on live alert." Passengers erupted, some clapping, some whispering furiously into their cameras. The older woman in pearls leaned forward, her voice cracking, "I knew she wasn't lying." Naomi looked around the cabin, her eyes passing over every witness, every phone, every crew member suddenly stripped bare. "I didn't come here to reveal myself," she said, her tone like a gavel striking wood. "But you left me no choice." Nicole's face crumpled, her authority evaporating. The captain looked as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Brian's arms fell limp at his sides. And for the first time since she boarded, Naomi smiled, not wide, not cruel, but sharp and cutting. "Now you know who I am. The question is, do you understand what that means?" The plane was silent. Silent, but no longer hers alone. It was hers entirely. The revelation hung in the cabin like lightning that had already struck but left the air charged, trembling. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Then the shock rippled outward. Nicole's hands, once steady and commanding, now fidgeted against the hem of her blazer. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again, searching for words that refused to arrive. Brian's smirk had vanished, replaced with a pallor that drained him of color. He shifted his weight, suddenly smaller than his shadow. Captain Daniel stood frozen, his authority unraveling in real time. His chest rose shallow, his jaw tight. He had barked commands moments earlier, but now his silence screamed louder. The mask of control had cracked. Passengers felt the shift instantly. The Latina woman lowered her phone just enough to whisper, trembling, "She owns it. She actually owns it." Her voice carried the awe of a verdict. Beside her, the college student looked vindicated, shoulders squaring with newfound courage. "I knew it," he said louder now. And then the applause started. Tentative at first, a single pair of hands clapping from row 5. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the cabin thundered with it, scattered, uneven, but undeniable. Phones recorded every clap, every cheer, every stunned expression on the faces of the crew. Nicole flinched at the sound, as if each clap chipped away at her authority. This is still a violation of policy," she stammered, her voice nearly drowned by the applause. Naomi didn't even turn toward her. She simply let the sound swell, an avalanche rolling down the narrow aisle. The older woman in pearls stood fully, her voice cutting through the noise. "You humiliated her in front of all of us. And for what? For how she looked." She turned, sweeping her gaze across the cabin. "You thought she didn't belong. Well, she belongs more than anyone else here." Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Passengers nodded, some raising their phones higher to capture the moment. The businessman in the blazer folded his arms, his tone edged with satisfaction. I hope the board sees every second of this, because we just did. Nicole glanced wildly at Brian, but his eyes darted away, guilt flooding in where arrogance had been. Daniel's grip on the cabin phone loosened until it slipped back into its cradle with a hollow click. The applause swelled again, no longer polite but defiant. Cameras pointed directly at the crew, the evidence mounting with every second. What had begun as whispers of injustice was now a tidal wave, and none of them could stop it. Naomi remained still, letting the storm collapse around her. She hadn't lifted a hand, hadn't raised her voice, but the cabin had already judged. And the verdict was final. For Nicole, for Brian, for Captain Daniel, this was no longer a flight. It was a reckoning. The clapping died down only enough for Rachel's voice still on speaker to cut clearly through the air. "Miss Carter, the board is live, awaiting your directive." Every head turned back to Naomi. Phones tilted forward, eager, recording. Nicole's chest heaved, panic cracking her once sharp composure. Brian tugged at his collar, sweat visible along his temple. Captain Daniel stood stiff, the weight of his uniform now a burden instead of armor. Naomi rose fully this time, her presence commanding the aisle without force, without volume. She picked up her phone and spoke, calm as if dictating minutes in a meeting. Effective immediately, suspend Captain Daniel Pierce. Grounds, misconduct, bias, failure of duty. Gasps exploded. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His hand twitched toward his badge, then fell uselessly to his side. Naomi didn't pause. Her gaze shifted to Nicole. Terminate Nicole Harris. Grounds, falsification of passenger records, destruction of property, verbal abuse, violation of anti-discrimination policy. Nicole's face went white. She stumbled back a step, mouth opening in protest. You can't." Naomi's tone sharpened. Final. "Already done." Rachel's voice confirmed without hesitation. "Credentials revoked. Access terminated. System updated." The screen on Nicole's work tablet blinked red, then locked her out entirely. She clutched it like a lifeline cut away, her breathing quickening as murmurs swept the cabin. Naomi turned to Brian next. "Suspend Brian Foster. Grounds, harassment, unlawful handling of passenger property, contributing to escalation." Brian's bravado collapsed in real time. "This isn't please. I was just following..." "Following what?" Naomi cut in, her eyes narrowing. "Following prejudice, following arrogance, following Nicole into the graveyard of your careers?" Rachel's voice again. "Suspension logged. Access revoked." Brian sagged against the galley wall, drained of color, the smirk that had defined him gone without trace. Passengers erupted, some clapping, some gasping, some whispering. She just fired them. Right here. Phones caught every second, beams of digital justice. Naomi didn't revel in the spectacle. Her tone remained calm, deliberate. "This isn't vengeance. It's accountability. For every passenger silenced, humiliated, dismissed on flights they paid for, this is the correction overdue." The blazer man nodded firmly, arms crossed. "About time someone did." The college student whispered, almost in awe. "She didn't even raise her voice." The older woman in pearls wiped the corner of her eye. "That's real power." The crew, once towering with authority, now stood dismantled, their badges worthless, their access revoked, their careers unraveling under the weight of Naomi's words. She returned to her seat, folded her phone on the tray table, and exhaled, calm, composed, final. The sentence had been delivered. The cabin was no longer hostile. It was reverent, charged with something heavier than applause. Respect. Phones stayed raised, but now they weren't just recording injustice, they were capturing its reversal. Nicole stood slack-jawed, her tablet dead in her hands. Brian sagged against the wall, stripped of the arrogance that had once shielded him. Captain Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the cockpit door, as if escape were still possible. But the verdict had already been written. Naomi remained standing. Her red blazer caught the low cabin light, not as a flourish of fashion, but as a banner of defiance. She looked over the passengers, row by row, her eyes steady, calm, unflinching. "You've seen what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness," she began, her voice firm but measured. "You've seen how arrogance can tear tickets, destroy dignity, and call it policy. And you've seen how quickly power collapses when truth walks into the room." No one moved. The only sound was the faint whir of the ventilation system, carrying her words like judgment through the pressurized air. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight for this seat. I simply sat in what I already owned. And yet, That was enough to make me a target. She paused, letting the truth cut deeper than any accusation. That's the sickness we carry, not in airlines, not in hotels, not in boardrooms, but everywhere people believe belonging is measured by appearance. The Latina passenger lowered her phone just long enough to whisper, "Say that again," almost as if begging for the world to hear it twice. Naomi's eyes flicked to the front of the cabin, her tone sharpening, final. So let me leave you with this. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits still. Sometimes it waits. And when the time is right, it speaks once, and that's enough. Gasps and murmurs spread, but this time they weren't of outrage. They were of recognition, of awakening. The blazer man clapped again, slow and deliberate. The student followed. Soon the entire cabin echoed with applause, not scattered, but unified, thunderous, the sound of a verdict sealed. Naomi didn't bow, didn't smile wide. She simply returned to her seat, placed her phone on the tray, and leaned back. The storm had passed, but its mark remained. And as the crew stood pale and broken, and the passengers kept clapping, one truth crystallized in every mind on board. She didn't just win her seat, she redefined the sky above it.